Okay, I am back again, ready to read from you The Princess Royale. And this section here we're going to be reading about is the Princess Royale Anne, the very first Princess Royale Anne. She was George II's daughter, and it's very interesting to read because this book is a book you can find on Audible if you want to hear. It's only one credit on Audible, but you can read this book and get it from Amazon. I feel, as I've said before, it's such a worthy read and a listen. Even if it's not me, listen to it from somebody else, because this section here that I'm reading is delving into the history of the Princess Royales. This section I'm reading about in this live is going to be on Princess Anne. She was the daughter of George II. She was the second Princess Royale. The first one was Princess Mary, and she was the daughter of Charles I. And as we know from our English history, Charles II never had any children. He never had any, legal descendants or heirs. So I just wanted to get started. This is, 15 pages, and, you can read about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a picture of Princess Anne and see if you can read that. So I'll read. She was the second daughter of a British sovereign to hold the Princess Royal title. In the Netherlands, she was styled Anna van Hanover. So she was the daughter of George II. So, but anyway, see here, daughter of George II of Great Britain, consort Caroline of Assenbach. Very interesting story. So I don't know if you can read anything more about that, but her House of Hanover. She had 3 children here. But anyway, just so you can see, this is Princess Anne Royale. The other Princess Anne, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The other Princess Anne, the first Princess Royal of warranted record, was born in the Baroque Palace of Hanover on 22nd October 1709. The influences of music and art surrounded her cradle, for the court of Hanover was counted the best in Germany for civility and decorum, and the elegant little opera house of Celle still stands in the vicinity to illustrate its taste and its diversions. Anne of Hanover was so royally born that her cousins included Frederick the Great and his sister, the future Queen Ulrika of Sweden and Duchess of Philippine of Brunswick. And her grandfather, then still the Elector George of Hanover, widened the regal cosmopolitan ambience by writing to Her Britannic Majesty Queen Anne to request permission to name the child after her and to solicit the pleasure of her favor of godmother. Queen Anne acquiesced and complacently sent the gift of a diamond necklace to her goddaughter. So she was named after Queen Anne. Interesting. It has proved equally sensible to endow the baby Anne's 2-year-old brother with the same of Frederick's. Frederick of Prussia had a kingly habit of giving gold plate for his christening gifts. Less fuss, however, was made by Princess Anne's younger sister, Emily and Caroline. No compliments were needed to be paid. Indeed, with the youngest, and she was given her mother's name. Caroline of Assenbach and George of Hanover have married in their early 20s. They were a young couple, casting sheep eyes at one another, deeply enjoying not only their own company but also the court balls and comedies staged for their wedding. George had first seen his bride when pretending to be merely traveling for pleasure as a Hanoverian nobleman, but having surveyed the lady, he sent an envoy to discover whether she was free and could be approached with a proposal. This Cinderella touch added popularity to the gossip woven around their romance. Yet they had become a married couple of 9 years standing, with 4 children, when Prince George's father was summoned to the English throne. Princess Anne was a plump and unattractive child, despite the blunt-spoken British agent who unkindly termed her podgy, ill-fashioned in his dispatches home to London. The German prince all followed the mode of the court of France, and Anne chattered in French as her nursery language almost before she began to learn German. Her great-grandmama, the Electress of Sofia, the Queen of Bohemia's daughter, supervised her daughter's education at early age when the modern children had scarcely entered kindergarten. One sighs for a Gainsborough who might have seen the children playing among the fountains of mosaic paths in the gardens of Herrhausen. On June 14, 1714, the Electress was strolling the arm in arm with her daughter, with young Anne and Fred skipping about them, when the only lady felt faint in the oppression of an approaching thunderstorm. The mystified children were hurried away as she had taken to a summer house, and she sat on the chair and quietly died. In London, only 2 months later, Queen Anne also died in Kensington Palace. And suddenly, her namesake was royal in a closer sense as a grandchild of the newly proclaimed king. Her grandfather and father hastened to London together, the one to be styled King George I, and the other, George, riding aside as his son and heir to the future, was called the Prince of Wales. The prince, having fondly embraced his wife Caroline, it was agreed that she should follow the 2 elder girls after a month, and the 7-year-old Frederick should remain in his studies at Hanover. The baby Caroline was also left behind. Her health was judged too delicate to travel before the spring. Anne perhaps saw no more than a glint of her mother's tears when they bade her brother goodbye. Their equerry, James Craggs, had first come to Hanover to inform the family of the great change in their fortunes, and Anne and her sister Emily begged the overland journey to the Dutch coast in his charge, traveling 3 days ahead of their mother. The long journey of nearly a week must have been enlivened for the little girls by their first lessons from Mr. Craig in English. As outriders, they also had to have 2 fiercely protective Turks who'd been with their grandfather for 30 years, and they were to be henceforth the children's most trusted sentinels. At The Hague, a yacht with attendant men of war was waiting, and as soon as their mother had joined them, they set off on an autumnal 2-day crossing of the North Sea. Their father drove to Margate to meet them. The new king had created his son, the Prince of Wales, at his first Privy Council, and later that week, Londoners were delighted at the sight of the Prince and Princess of Wales driving together over the London Bridge, with 2 little princesses, lovely and sprightly, peeping out from a coach behind them. They had friendly crowds to cheer them as they were set down at St. James's Palace, and that evening the children stayed up late to gaze wide-eyed at the bonfires and the illuminations. Walking hand in hand, the 2 little girls also lent an unaccustomed domestic note to the coronation. The sight of the royal children is not known for several hundred years, as one loyal preacher asserted with a pleasant, if inaccurate enthusiasm. 2 days later, London The Londoners were also charmed by the procession of posies for Princess Anne's birthday, and the child herself made a good impression. To judge by the praise of the Lord Chancellor's wife, Lady Cowper, Princess Anne was 5 years old. She speaks, reads, and writes both French and German to perfection, she noted in her journal. She knows a great deal of history and geography, speaks English, and very prettily dances around very well. In the following week, all the royal family occupied the window to watch the unfamiliar pageantry of Lord Mayor's show. The next day, awakening by pealing bells, the Princess Anne discovered it was her papa's birthday, and perhaps saw something of the guests arriving at St. James in magnificent new clothes for the first court ball. Okay, we're on to the next section. Fortunately, in contrast to the excitement at their first reception, the two sisters soon went to live in pastoral calm of Kensington Palace. Then, in the green fields beyond London, every hour of Anne's day was relegated and carefully as a Hanover clock. It was directed that she should rise at 7, pray, and have breakfast, walk from 8 till 9, read, and then commence lessons. Dining at 1 and then playing shuttlecock, but first walking and talking of sensible things. At an early age, moreover, she was taught to play on a clavichord, and music soon became her great passion. When only 8 or 9 years old, she clearly merited a skilled music master. None other than Handel was appointed at a salary raising of £200 a year. If this stipend appeared handsome in those days, it was but a fraction of the £19,000 provided for the princess's joint establishment, and no more than £200 annually was allowed to the office of laundress. An additional sum was £100 paid through the linen room to a German who does the work. It compares with the £60 expended for a lace-trimmed suit of bibs, aprons, cap, ruffles, and for Anne's little sister, there was a petty expense of nursery occupants as tuning the harpsichord, food for their birds. Handel nevertheless enjoyed his own small perquisites, and from the lessons improvised for Princess Anne, he concocted the suite of pieces for the clavichord, which figured in 1720 as his first purely instrumental album to be published. It was pleasant to visualize the 35-year-old master of music of Kensington, in ruffles and bulky velvet, on his way to 5 o'clock session with his young pupil, strolling through the arcade walk of the palace, quadrangle still to his day called the Princess's Court. Whenever their parents proposed to spend time at Kensington, however, the children were hurried to St. James. They were to be brought back only when the Prince and the Princess of Wales had returned to their establishment at Richmond Lodge or at Leicester House. On the stubborn issue of the custody of his grandchildren, the king adopted an attitude so harsh, so unreal and obstinate, that the natural parents were not permitted to spend a day with their own daughters. The king's judges were called to decide the issue of guardianship, and though some resigned, the majority asserted in the king's favor that a grandfather was indeed the appropriate protector. The victory secured, his point won, the king appeared lenient, and Caroline was allowed to visit the girls once a week, provided there was no fuss. Princess Anne would wait at the window for the first sight of a sedan chair, carried without guards or retinue, which the Princess of Wales was ordinarily reduced to using for convenience. The bereft mother poured out in anguish of the occasions in spite of letters to her cousin in Paris, the Duchess of Orleans. often scribbling letters of 25 pages, and one week as many as 43 pages. The harassed Duchess could scarcely cope with the flood. She said, "It takes all of my time." You may imagine, she was told in a less emotional correspondence. Inevitably, the king's strictness led to pretenses and subterfuges, and young Anne could not help but be embroiled in deception. In the summer of 1718, after not seeing her father for 6 months, she secretly sent him a basket of cherries which her sisters had helped her pick at Kensington's garden. The prince broke down and wept when he found hidden in the fruit a message that said, "Their heart and soul and thoughts were always with dear papa." Shortly afterwards, Princess Anne herself fell ill with the dreaded symptoms of smallpox, and her mother rushed to Kensington Palace only to find, according to Lady Cowper, that the two Turks, Mohammed and Mustafa, sternly barred her way. In desperation, Caroline sought an audience with King merely to be rebuffed with the message that he himself appointed a physician in her agitation. She wrote an utterly submissive letter. It was only when the king consented she might go, provided she took neither doctor nor physic. Eventually, Caroline was permitted to nurse her daughter back to health, taking heart from the success. Prince George also wrote submissively to his parent. The father and son duly met. The prince could make little of his father's angry mutterings except the words, "Your conduct, your conduct." Yet the breach was healed and the quarrel was patched up. Princess Anne recovered, disfigured not too much, and there was a notable sequel. Princess Caroline chanced to hear from the author Lady Mary Wortley Montagu of the success of the surgeons of Constantinople in practicing inoculation and being restored to favor. She persuaded the king to reprieve 5 criminals from the scaffold, provided they submit to the needle as a test. The experiment was successful. The princess had her younger daughters, Emily and Caroline, inoculated, and the scourge of smallpox, which had carried off so many of the princesses, heroines of our tale, flinched in defeat at last. Okay, we're on to the next section. Princess Anne was 17 when George I flew into his last rage, and he had a stroke in his coach at Osnabrück. The news reached Kensington that our parents were at last the king and the queen. In the next month or two, Handel must have enlivened her music hours by placing before her the dazzling anthems and marches which he composed for the coronation, almost as fast as they flowed from his pen. Not long before, Handel had given a recital at the newly enlarged organ in St. Paul's Cathedral for the princess and her mother. They were clearly demonstrating that there was no more accomplished organist in England, if not in all of Europe. Now the great anthem, Zadok the Priest, this has since been played at every coronation from George II to Elizabeth II, and it was first rehearsed before the new Princess Royal Anne. After the ceremony in Westminster Abbey, that arch witnesses, Mrs. Delaney, enthused over the enchantment of the Princess Royale and her 2 younger sisters walking beneath the royal canopy and carrying the Queen's diamond-spangled train. They were dressed in the stiff-bodied gowns of silver tissue. They were embroidered with silver trimming, with diadems on their heads, purple mantles edged with ermine, and vast long trains. They were very prettily dressed and looked very well, It was useless for Lord Hervey to sneer that the glitter had been borrowed from the jeweler, and celebrated her 18th birthday the following week. And at the feasts, the fetes, the masquerades, the court balls, and the drawing rooms that marked the new reign, she found herself the center of attention. It was hardly surprising, if at all, went a little to her head after the cloistered years in Kensington, although she now had a younger brother, aged 6, as well as 5 sisters. She had always found herself senior in precedence of the junior set. Now she realized all too well that the heir to the throne, to the flattery and richness and prestige, was her elder brother, Fred, in Germany, who she could scarcely remember. "I would gladly die tomorrow," she said impulsively, "if I could be a queen today." And the phrase never ceased to be repeated and maliciously distorted. Far from being too deeply envious of her brother, the princess could hardly await to see him. Puzzled because his arrival from Hanover was so long delayed, the new king was in fact as distrustful as his heir as his own father had been. Royal Anne was prevailed on to pass the time by taking the waters at Turnbridge Wells, enjoying the shops and the morning crush on the Pantiles, though the press of people was so far from crushing when the gentlemen with white wands preceded her to ward off the over-inquisitive. Her Highness's charms, everybody by her affable and courteous behavior, gushed Dr. Arbuthnot. She is the strongest person in the place. If walking every day is to be a sign of strength, I tell her Highness she does more good than the waters, for she keeps some ladies in exercise and breath that want it. The following month, Anne warded off her puppy fat still more vigorously by hunting, riding to hounds so violently that she quite frightened her sister. P.S. We are just come back from hunting, in good health. Okay, I have to end this because I'm getting interruptions.